Hi everybody, Rad Mom here. Welcome back to the garden on this lovely summer night where we're going to be visiting with our old pal JammiDodger. But first, like the video if you enjoy my content and subscribe to the channel so that we can all work together to drag feminism back into the real world, because as we shall see, not everyone lives there. Our old pal Jammy has finally taken it upon herself to break down rapid-onset gender dysphoria. And, you know, with her psych degree, it's bound to be riveting, right? No, strangely. Having a degree does not make you an academic. I don't have a degree, but then I make no pretense to such. The video where I first took on Jammy has 3 times the views of any of my others. We have sort of been set up against one another, and that actually makes a lot of sense to me. We have a lot more in common than may be obvious at first glance. I was a transgender adolescent in the 90s, back before it was cool, back before all this. So gather around, children, as the elder millennial regales you with the tale of gender dysphoria caught in the wild in the days of landlines and VCRs. We're going to compare and contrast my somewhat isolated internal experience with Lippman's study, the rapid-onset gender dysphoria study that's had everyone in such a tizzy all these years, and Jammy's response to it. While it is also anecdotal, I'm just laying it all out because, unlike Jammy, I had nothing to lose here. I worked my way out of the gender jungle years ago. I'm only here because I see people like Jammy who stake their identity on this lie and then make it their mission to spread it. Madam, I object. Basically, what this amounts to is Jammy laying out the case for us why trans adults need trans kids. The whole video is basically an example of the classic fascist double bind. Our enemies are weak and doomed to defeat. And our enemies must be countered at all costs. Like, those two things cannot both be true, right? Oh man, but do we hear this all the time? Or what? If she succeeds in discrediting the study, it just raises further questions of why? Why now? And, you know, what was it about this study that got everybody so in a tizzy in the first place anyway? What was it about this study that was so damn special that she felt the need to take it on after 5 years? Let's find out.
This is a topic I've been wanting to talk about for such a long time. I mean, the research was first done 5 years ago now, and I've wanted to discuss it ever since, but I wanted to wait until I could really give this video the time it deserves and really do it properly. So here we go.
So there's our first explanation of why now. Because she had the time. Me too.
So, best place to start with this video is a definition. What is rapid onset gender dysphoria? In short, ROGD is a proposed subtype of suddenly appearing gender dysphoria that occurs during or after puberty. It's believed to be caused by peer influence and social contagion. It can also be referred to as the false belief that you can catch being trans.
And this can be referred to as the first time you show your bias. You know, aside from the beard. Really, we're going to spend so much time harping on the bias that I'm actually going to skip around quite a bit, because we don't need to make that argument over and over and over again. Who the hell is biased here, Miss I Think I'm a Man?
The research was conducted by Lisa Lippman, who at the time was an assistant professor at the Icahn School of Medicine at Mount Sinai. I hope I pronounced that right. She was initially trained in preventative medicine and public health, and in obstetrics and gynecology. Her experience was in providing reproductive healthcare to teens and women. It has been stated that she has no personal experience or training with working with transgender youth.
So Dr. Lippman is a gynecologist. Sounds like she has some biases of her own. I happen to share them. But the biases on only the biases on one side are going to be addressed here, and we're going to try and rectify that.
She's now currently the president for an organisation called the Institute for Comprehensive Gender Dysphoria Research. Yep. An organisation that someone called Michael Bailey is also involved in, who is a strong proponent of autogynephilia.
Oh no, not someone who believes in autogynephilia. That sounds like a gender-critical organization to me.
Given the name, it sounds like a very official organisation and like it would be the holy grail of all information on gender dysphoria. But the output of publication seems to focus on ROGD, parent reports around ROGD and other things, detransitioners, and with no apparent direct research on actual trans people.
Her think tank pursues the same stuff that she wrote the study on. That sounds like Dr. Lippman still believes in her thesis.
I don't think it can be the Comprehensive Institute of Gender Dysphoria research if it doesn't actually conduct research on the people who are experiencing gender dysphoria themselves.
Jammi is misrepresenting the nature of the research here, and I think that this comes back to an essential difference of approach to the whole concept of transness, okay? Dr. Lippman appears to have approached transness as if it were a mental illness. So you're not going to go and talk to the mentally ill people about their mental illness, are you? Because you're not going to get a straight answer from them.
Now we're going to pop back to 2018 to talk about the original piece of research on rapid-onset gender dysphoria. So as a quick overview, the original research paper was called Parent Reports of Adolescents and Young Adults Perceived to Show Signs of Rapid-Onset Gender Dysphoria. The original research required heavy edits, so I'll be discussing it from the perspective of what the original paper said and how that was changed with the correction.
And see, this is the problem when you talk about something that only happened a few years ago. I remember this. They had to edit the shit out of that paper for the same reason that she mentions the editor of +1 had to apologize for publishing it at all, which was the absolute social freakout that happened when this came out. Which, to be honest, I still don't understand. If it's such bad science and is only talking about a proposed subtype of gender dysphoria anyway.
Then go into the limitations of the research, criticisms, and the impact it's had, before finishing off with the real results on gender dysphoria and rapid-onset gender dysphoria, and the truth about transgender youth and adolescents.
So Jammi is just going to basically just harp on and on about Dr. Lippman's bias, meanwhile pretending to be the purveyor of objective truth on this subject. Because you got no horse in this race, right, Jammi? Come on.
To kick us off, the original versus the corrected paper. The original purpose was described as a way to document and explore parental observations of their child's apparent ROGD and their increased social media use and friendship groups. The purpose was also stated as describing the resulting presentation of gender dysphoria, which is inconsistent with existing research literature, apparently. The correction pulled back on those statements about social media use, and the purpose was adjusted to not be about describing the resulting presentation of gender dysphoria, but instead to collect parental observations around apparent, sudden, or rapid onset gender dysphoria, and then develop hypotheses around contributing factors towards this apparent rapid onset.
Am I the only one who just doesn't see that big a difference here? Like, I don't see it. Yeah, it's been reworded to be more pedantic. So what? Because people came along afterwards and basically forced her to.
Corrected methods were expanded to include the actual website names of where the survey link was placed, and emphasised right at the start that this is a descriptive exploratory study.
A descriptive exploratory study. So we're not even allowed to explore this stuff?
There were instances in the corrected version where it made it clear that these results were based on parental observations.
That's a good thing. Being more clear about the source of your information is a good thing. Basically, in order to accomplish what she's trying to do here, JammiDodger has to discredit the parents' concerns, which is itself concerning. This really just kind of all sounds a lot like, well, you know, the classic parents' refrain of, gosh, it just came out of nowhere. I had no idea. Wouldn't you know it? Appearances can be deceptive, isn't that right, Jammi?
Around a quarter of parents said their children showed distrust towards cisgender people and stopped spending time with their cisgender friends. Shocking. I wonder why that happened. The half-ish of children were reported as trying to isolate themselves from family and only trusting info about gender dysphoria from transgender sources. These results, the results of isolation from family, distrust, not talking to some cisgender friends anymore, all of this is so blindingly obviously most likely down to rejection from these people, or knowledge that they were anti-trans in some way.
That's just confirmation bias at work, and you just demonstrated it for us. Thanks.
As a trans person myself who came out as a teenager and knows and is friends with many other trans people, this all makes sense. It's not about influence, it's not about social contagion, it's all about finding people who support you and finding solidarity and safety within those groups.
Or excluding those who don't agree, perhaps? Just say the lie. Right, Jammy?
Okay. There was also a comment made that the worsening of mental health, the breakdown of the parent-child relationship, and behaviours that isolate children from their families, non-transgender friends, and mainstream sources of information are particularly concerning.
Yeah, the isolation is particularly concerning. It makes y'all look like a cult.
It further claimed that ROGD appears to represent a distinct entity from gender dysphoria observed in individuals who've previously been described as transgender.
If it's distinct, then what are you worried about? Where's the beef here? Don't worry, dear viewer.
It ended by saying that more research is needed to understand the implications and scope of rapid-onset gender dysphoria.
Which it sounds like exactly what that think tank you mentioned earlier that she works for now is doing.
The existence of ROGD is now framed as a potential, but clearly stating it has not been clinically validated. That's a very important point. It's not been clinically validated.
Clinically validated? You know what has been clinically validated? The fact that you think you're a man somehow. So what the hell is that supposed to mean? To anyone who does not subscribe to this delusion, it discredits the fucking clinical validation is what it does. So, again, you got nothing.
More tentatively.
Oh my god. And you know what? It's late. And I don't know about you guys, I simply do not have the patience right now to go through this with a fine-tooth comb. Long story short, the second version was different than the first version. And she's trying to make some kind of hay out of that, despite the fact that I'm pretty sure we all remember the intense scrutiny and pressure they put this woman under to fix this thing. I'm just going to go ahead and skip some repetitions of the bias argument and get right to the meat of the matter.
Trans kids exist, come on. The evidence only needs to be is that being trans is something you are born as, meaning that trans adults would need to be trans kids, whether they realised it or not.
Thank you, Jammy. Thank you for saying it out loud. Finally. I finally found somebody who just had the guts to say it. Trans adults need trans kids. Because if there are no trans kids, there are no trans adults either. They need there to be trans kids. And I think that that's part of why this upset people so much. Because it implies heavily that being trans is in fact a mental illness.
They believe that other methods of gender dysphoria management should be explored, ignoring the fact that gender-affirming care is the treatment for gender dysphoria.
Oh, is it now?
The third site used was Youth Trans Critical Professionals. That does not feel like a title or a name or a sentence, it just feels like 4 random words put together. I feel like that's most of language, but you know what I mean.
Youth Trans Critical Professionals sounds to me like a website that exists because those people were having trouble finding jobs because they subscribe to reality out loud.
They say things like young children are being given cross-sex hormones, which they are not.
No, you're right. Young children are being given puberty blockers, which is not better. They'll give you puberty blockers as early as Tanner stage 2, which can be as early as 9. But you know, the thing about puberty blockers is you kind of have to start taking them before puberty, which makes you a child. The end.
You're actively seeking out parents who have actively sought out websites that are hostile towards trans people, so it's very likely that you're coming across parents that do not accept their child as trans, and already have a belief that ROGD is in some way a real concept, and this was specifically looked for in participant eligibility.
See, here's where we're gonna go to start getting into some of my experiences. I have a pretty good reason to believe that transgenderism is some kind of social contagion because 25, 30 years ago, I was alone. Okay? When I was 13 and thought I was secretly somehow a man inside, I was the only person I could find who experienced this. Okay? And I belong to a pretty liberal community with whom I felt comfortable talking about this stuff. I talked about this stuff off and on with many different people for years, and I'm talking over a decade. And I never found another person who felt like I did, ever. Until about 10 years ago. Wouldn't you know it?
It increased the likelihood that those who then took part in the study agreed with the premise of the study and therefore agreed with the existence and the idea of rapid onset gender dysphoria, thus biasing the results.
Because they were trying to characterize a thing. They were not trying to find out the prevalence of the thing. That would be a different kind of study. So you're going looking for something, so you go look in the place where it's likely to be. That is how science works. Okay? But on the other hand, even if you do consider this to be a study-breaking bias, I want you to keep in mind what it is, the source material, okay? Where they went to find the interviews, because that is going to be a key point here in a little bit.
The report collected no data on actual trans youth or clinicians. All results were entirely based on the responses of these 250 parents.
She went out and found the next of kin of the delusional people to ask about their delusions.
A major thing to point out is that parents are not qualified to classify anybody's, including their own child's, gender dysphoria, unless of course they receive formal training and have a license to conduct clinical psychiatric diagnoses. Seems highly unlikely that a decent portion, if any, parents met this criteria.
So you're not qualified to speak on your child's behalf unless you are indoctrinated into our cult. I disagree.
As teens often delay coming out as trans, particularly when they're in a hostile environment and fear rejection from friends and family.
I hope you're not implying that teenagers are only going to pursue something that their parents approve of, because that would be silly.
I mean, if your parents are frequenting anti-trans websites, I feel like their opinion would not be overly friendly and supporting.
You also have not proved causation here. Did the parents go to the anti-trans websites before or after their kids came out to them? You don't fucking know that. You don't fucking know that. You can't base anything off that because that information is not in here. But we're finally getting to the fun bit.
They attended sessions where she presented preliminary results on this paper. Those members, along with others who attended those sessions, reported that during those sessions, Lippman was given extensive critique on the poor quality of her research. But she made no attempt to address these issues in the final paper.
Nobody liked it, but she didn't let that stop her. Good on you, Dr. Lippman.
Suggesting that she places ideology over scientific rigor.
Placing ideology over scientific rigor is something you know a lot about, isn't it, Jammy?
And failed to acknowledge or account for any skew or bias that had been introduced into the research.
Just as you have failed to account for any bias or skew that is involved in your presentation of this information. Because you have a very, very strong motivator to explain to us all why trans youth need to be listened to, don't you?
We'll go through some of this evidence in a little bit, but right now I want to talk to you about the impact that this research has had, because oh my, is it bad, big, and completely unjustified.
Completely unjustified? Again, I don't think you've shown that. My own personal experience leads me to believe that is not the case.
The term ROGD has taken on a life of its own and is used constantly by those spreading transphobic rhetoric.
Constantly? Well, gosh, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong. I'm not sure I've even discussed this topic before.
Sites called Parents of ROGD Kids have appeared, who describe themselves as a group of parents whose children have suddenly decided they identify strongly with the opposite sex. They refer to ROGD as a recent epidemic among vulnerable youth. As I'm saying all of these impacts, please bear in mind the criticisms.
Basically, the way you're outlining this is it sounds like people realized that they were not alone, and that this study and the publicization of it really hit a nerve that you loathe.
and how poor and how biased and how wrong this research is.
B-I-A-S-E-D. Biased. You did this in the labeling of your chapters too. The word you're looking for is biased. Please, please. I know you're confused about how language works, but do try. You are from the country where the language originated. Please do try.
Mind-boggling. Anyway, going back to parents of ROGD kids, they're also skeptical of the gender-affirming approach and seemingly choose to ignore the massive amount of evidence that supports this approach and all the medical and professional organisations and boards that support it.
And you seem to ignore the massive amounts of evidence that you're not a man.
They clearly think that they know more than the trans people themselves and the clinicians.
They think they know better than the delusional people. Yes, call it self-righteous if you will, because the real world is scary, okay? It takes some grit to live here.
It is dangerous and unfair to make claims based on this low quality of research that can lead to the prevention of transgender youth being correctly diagnosed with gender dysphoria and receiving the appropriate care.
You mean affirmative care?
Something that has been so strongly and widely rejected by the people that actually know what they're talking about should never have the impact that ROGD has been able to have.
Yeah, except that I do know what I'm talking about from the entire other end of it from you. That's the part you can't wrap your mind around, right?
And at the end of the day, it all boils down to transphobia. People were desperate to have something to cling on to justify their bigotry. And ROGD was the perfect thing at the perfect time.
Really? Really? That's all you've got? Why do you hate me? Nobody hates you. I don't hate you. I don't know you. You're probably a lost cause. But you're sitting there spreading these lies, encouraging young people who don't fucking know any better, because their frontal lobes haven't developed yet, and they never will if you put them on puberty blockers at 9, okay, to follow you down the primrose path to whatever the hell that is. But you're not a man, and you never will be, and that's okay. It really strikes me as similar to women who decide they want to stay at home and raise their children and need to invoke Jesus to justify it. And then go around in their insecurity proclaiming that everybody needs to adopt their lifestyle because it'll make them just as happy. The lady doth protest too much.
People with those views don't actually care that it is a bad piece of research that in no way supports what they're saying.
People with those views don't actually care about the research? Jammy, you're talking about yourself, honey.
People just jumped on a term that gave them a legitimate justification to be transphobic, when in reality, there is no justification.
I have no transphobia. I don't. But I have legitimate justification for objecting to your bullshit. What I'm afraid of is this lie, okay? Because, yeah, there but for the grace of time go I, okay? If this shit had been as popular 20 years ago, how old am I? No, 25 years ago. If this shit had been as popular 25 years ago, I would have been in line for my fucking testosterone shots, okay? I just decided when I was about 20 that I didn't want to trade one set of problems for a Napoleon complex. I'm 5'4", okay? Come on. And just the ingratitude of being the possessor of a functional human body that does basically what I want and needed to do when I want and needed to do it, to then go and have that sliced up seems just so petty and ungrateful to me. And I suppose I do judge people like Jammy from that standard just because, oh my gosh, it took me 15 years of, you know, internal struggle and whatever to get to untangle this shit. And then I see somebody like this out there just spraying it all over. And I cannot abide.
The evidence of ROGD can politely be described as very low quality, but no quality evidence is more accurate a description.
Anecdotal evidence is still evidence.
A 2021 study confirmed that there is no evidence for the existence of rapid-onset gender dysphoria.
Here we go. This 2021 study that she loves so fucking much. Remember what the big key problem with Dr. Lippman's study was? Where they sourced their information, right? Well, where the hell did this study source their information?
This study did actually include clinical data from actual transgender youth about their gender dysphoria, across youth from 10 different clinics.
Clinics. Gender clinics. They went to fucking gender clinics to talk to young trans kids about their transness. Oh, okay, because that's an unbiased study. That's literally exactly the same issue. They went looking for what they wanted, where they would probably find it. How in the world is this study good and the one that disagrees with you is bad? Explain that to me.
One study found that 93% of peer-reviewed studies showed that transitioning improved well-being, and no studies showed a decline in well-being with transitioning.
Mental well-being, not physical well-being. I don't think any of these studies are asking them about the physical effects of, being on cross-sex hormones for years on end. And also, someone else made this point. I forget where I heard this, but it's a great point, which is that anorexics are super happy when you let them not eat. And when they're on the mend and are approaching, a healthy weight, they are fucking miserable. But they're not the ones who get to say whether they are doing well or not, because they're the ones with the delusion, Jammy.
At worst, it gave a neutral outcome, and that was for 7%. Rates of regret are documented as being minuscule.
And rates of regret are minuscule because detransitioners don't count.
Extensive findings show that if transgender people have supportive environments, it leads them to having no increased mental health issues as compared to cisgender people.
Yeah, it's true. When you don't give someone what they want, they are unhappy. But what if what they want is bad for them? Withholding it from them is the loving, kind thing to do. Especially if they are a child.
I cannot stress enough, the affirmative approach is the way to treat trans people.
Give us what we want and we'll be happy. Enabling someone's delusion is wrong. The affirmative approach is fucking enabling a delusion. That's cruel. Especially when medical professionals know better. I think on some level, even you know better. And this stuff just makes me so angry. I'm spitting mad. Because no. Whether or not rapid onset gender dysphoria is actually a thing is beside the point, because you're still not a man, and you never will be. Human beings cannot change their sex. That is the whole point here. Dr. Lippman's paper merely comments on a proposed subtype of the delusion where someone thinks they need to. That's it. I wish she'd put that word in there. Then maybe we wouldn't be having this stupid debate. But I thought that this was a good opportunity to kind of put myself against somebody who I feel pretty evenly matched with, actually. Thank you so much for sticking with me through all of that nonsense. This is important stuff. They're coming for the kids. They really are. She said it. In order for there to be trans adults, there have to be trans kids. They need them. So thanks, Jammy. I have been Rad Mom. Thank you for sticking with me out here in the garden on this lovely summer night, and I will see y'all at noon for the live stream and discussion and next Saturday morning at 11 with another video, and I'll see you then. Okay, thanks, bye.